Welcome to another True Horror Stories video from the files of Unsolved Ghost Stories. We all know how creepy ghost stories can be when they are told as if they really happened, right? Well, these are true horror stories experienced by real people, so let's jump right into the video before you change your mind and turn back. Number 3. I am a female in my late 30s who works for a large tour company as a travel counselor. Since we're pretty well known, I won't name any names for privacy reasons. To say the least, you must take my word for it that what occurred here was 100% real. And yes, I know everyone claims that on here, but you'll just have to take my word for it. In my role as a travel counselor, which is fancy for a travel agent, I have booked many cruises. As industry professionals, many cruise lines offer us what's called a fam trip to familiarize us with what they have to offer. A few weeks before the holidays, I was offered the opportunity to take such a trip on a 4-night cruise to the Baja Peninsula. My husband had a big guys trip with his best friends planned for the day after Christmas. I thought it was perfect. My in-laws have been begging us to watch our 7-year-old daughter, so she went to grandma's while I took a free cruise. What could possibly go wrong? A little sand, surf, and sun while it's winter is much better than the teens and below zeros we have up north. It was a perfect flight. Boarding was as smooth as butter. The balcony room I was assigned was perfect. The experience has been good so far. As I was eating dinner, I noticed an Indian man seated next to me. I thought this was odd since there were several empty seats. After striking up a conversation, he introduces himself and says he is traveling with his parents, sister, and her family. He is 26 years old, works in communication, and studies at a college in London. He seems like a nice guy. In the course of the conversation, I mentioned that I'm happily married and have a child. When his family arrives, we part ways. I don't expect to see him again. As soon as I get off our ship the next day, I sign up for a Segway tour. And who do I see in line? My new friend and his father, and I assume his oldest nephew as well. Before we begin our tour, he waves at me and we have a little chit-chat. I chose to look around the shops after the tour and grab some pizza, but I felt as if I was being watched. I turned around several times, but no one was there. I brushed it off and carried on with my day. After going back to the ship, I changed into my bathing suit and went lay out on the deck. My skin loves the vitamin D on this 72-degree day, so I ordered a drink and put on my wireless headphones. I felt hands shake me as I was dozing off. I jokingly sat up straight. It was my so-called friend. While he is frowning and staring at me disapprovingly, he angrily tells me that I cannot show off my body, and then I behave like an asshole, disrespecting him and his religion. 2 of the crew employees I am friends with have heard the commotion and are telling him to leave me alone. Whatever, I am embarrassed. I tell him I am a married woman whose actions don't concern him. As he walks away, he tells me I would be sorry if I were his woman. So I figured I would not have to deal with him, and the next day there was no sign of him. That night, I sat on my balcony tanning and dozing as we were at sea. After a few martinis at the piano bar, I settled into my room for the night after chatting with my husband on the phone. As I'm about to drift off, my door starts shaking. It sounds like someone is running violently towards my door. I put on a robe and gaze out my peephole. That Indian guy is there. At the moment, he looks crazy. His formal wear is on. The man was screaming profanities at me. His hair was red and he turned to face me. Luckily, the guy across the hall doesn't let him stay in the hallway, so he tells the creep to leave. A few minutes before his kids wake up, the Indian man gives one last swear word. The next morning, the guy across the hall tells me something dreadful. He swears the guy had a steak knife in his hand. I informed the cruise director, but I'm not sure what happened next. The last time I saw him was as we disembarked from the cruise. Luckily, he didn't see me because he was carrying one of his nieces. I have always wondered what would have happened if he had gotten into my room and why he acted that way. I was frightened. Number 2. I am E.J. Hunyadi. I'm on TikTok at EJ Hunyadi. Recently, my friends and I had a close call with a stray bullet, and when I say close, I mean inches close. Without a doubt, it's not something we'd ever like to experience again. A few months ago, my friends and I attended a professional hockey game in Minneapolis. We decided to make a weekend trip out of it since it was about a 5-hour drive from where we lived. Kevin picked me up that Friday afternoon, and then we picked up my friend Dan and drove. We were not going to a hotel, but rather to the home of a mutual friend, Jack. We were going to stay at Jack's house for the weekend since he lived in North Minneapolis. We all grew up with Jack and were good friends with him. He also had tickets for the hockey game. Besides saving money on hotels, staying at his place would make the weekend a lot more fun. Kevin parked the car on the street in front of Jack's house when we arrived early in the morning. After texting Jack to let him know we were there, we got out and went to the back to get our bags. Suddenly, we heard tires screeching and turned to see the intersection directly behind us. Another dark-colored SUV apparently was cut off by a green compact car. As the driver attempted to proceed through the intersection, both cars stopped and the two male drivers started yelling at each other. Since I didn't want to get involved, I quickly grabbed my bag and walked up to the path to Jack's house with Dan close behind me. The house that Jack lived in was a duplex where he rented one floor and someone else lived on the second floor. When we entered the walk-in porch, Dan and I weren't sure which door was Jack's since he had just moved to the city a short time earlier. We stood there for a while, so I pulled out my phone to call Jack and ask him to let us in. Meanwhile, Kevin was still working on his car, rearranging some bags and trying to fix a panel that had come loose during the trip. At this point, both drivers were still yelling at each other and had exited their vehicles. From the walk-in porch, I didn't have a great view of the situation, but I could still hear them yelling. Since Jack's house is right on the corner, we were only about 20 yards from the action. We heard a loud pop. The two of us froze, and I saw Kevin get up from the back of his car and look around. Immediately, I thought it was a gunshot, but I wasn't 100% sure. As I turned to Dan, I could see that he too thought it was a gunshot. "Let's get the hell inside now," Dan said nervously. I froze and called Jack, who was on his way to open the door. During this time, we heard the two cars pull away and Kevin joined us on the porch. All of us agreed that it was a gunshot, and it had come from one of the two drivers involved in the road rage incident. We hadn't seen it directly, but one of the drivers had clearly fired a gun. Kevin said he didn't hear bullets whizzing by, and we didn't know who shot or in which direction the bullet went. Jack let us into his house, commenting that he had also heard the shot and swearing that nothing had happened since he had moved in. We talked about it for a bit, but no one was hurt and the drivers were gone anyway, so we just shrugged and moved on. We spent the rest of the evening eating, exploring, and getting drunk at an exciting hockey game. Kevin didn't use his car for the remainder of the weekend because Jack knew the area and offered to drive us everywhere. On Sunday afternoon, as we piled back into Kevin's car to head home, we realized where exactly the bullet had gone. A bullet hole was clearly visible in Kevin's rearview mirror and windshield, with glass shards and bits of plastic strewn all over his dashboard. We looked around for an entrance hole in the back of the car, but we couldn't find one, so we could only assume the bullet entered the open hatch of Kevin's car while we hunched over trying to fix the panel. Considering the bullet's trajectory and Kevin's position at the time of the incident, there was no way he was more than a foot away from being hit. Kevin would have been shot in the head or neck if he had been standing up and might be dead right now. This photo shows where the bullet passed through the windshield and mirror of the car. I really hope it went into a tree rather than one of the many houses in the area. After the shock of discovery had subsided, we called the police so an insurance report could be written. Kevin showed her the bullet hole in his windshield at first. The officer was confused about the lack of an entrance hole in the back. For a moment, she even fired a gun from inside the car, but once Kevin explained why the back was open and where he was standing, she was stunned. No one was able to provide the officer with any valuable information like a detailed description of the shooter or a license plate number. As soon as the officer left, We had to figure out how to drive 5 hours home with a bullet hole in our windshield. We were lucky to find some sealer and duct tape at our local hardware store to patch the hole. We talked about the fragility of human life during the drive home and spent a few hours thinking about it. A month later, I haven't fully processed how close Kevin came to being shot and possibly killed. It's hard to imagine what he feels about it. If Kevin was a few inches taller when the gun went off, our lives would be very different today. I hope that the man who fired a gun in a neighborhood full of houses and people gets his life together or ends up in jail before he hurts any innocent bystanders. Number 1. At 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room on Craigslist for a rent. The apartment was really comfortable with 2 bedrooms. Since it was nearby campus and was cheaper, it was an ideal place to live. The girl who lived there was 29 years old and her name was Beth. I remember how tall and pretty big she was and how she had jet black hair and pale makeup. Although she was a bit quiet, she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. Things have gone well so far. And I noticed something was off. She kept saying I looked like Shia LaBeouf all through dinner. As I didn't know what to say, I just shrugged it off with a thank you. It didn't make sense to me since I didn't look like Shia LaBeouf. She asked me if I wanted to see her room when we got home. Even though I declined, she took me to see it anyway. She had posters of Shia LaBeouf all over her walls. Her mirror was even covered in photos of him. She even owned all of his movies. I didn't know what to think. It was creepy. Throughout the night, she kept saying I looked just like him, and now it's obvious she's obsessed with him. A few weeks passed, so I didn't see her much. We didn't spend much time together. When she came home from work, she would practically run into a room. She would stay there all night. I would hear her giggling through the walls all night long. What could she possibly be doing there? She occasionally came out to talk to me for about 2 minutes. I suspected she was drinking a lot because she slurred her words all the time. Sometimes, she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room without saying anything. She would just stand there without saying a word. As I would turn and see her, I would be surprised and say hello to her. But then there would be this long, awkward pose and she would giggle with a creepy, high-pitched voice. I felt uncomfortable around her. I had the chills. One night at around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. When I came out my bedroom, all the lights were off. While all of the lights were off in my bedroom, I could still see Beth standing at the front door. Her face was against it. As she turned the lock back and forth over and over again, she mumbled my name. Max Barker, Max Barker, Max Barker. Standing in the dark and hearing her mumble my name really freaked me out. She looks like a big version of the girl from The Ring, and that doesn't help. Then I quietly went back into my room, walking backwards as I did so. Getting into my room, I tried to go to sleep. During one of my movie nights, she stumbled out of her room and turned on the light in the living room, causing me to have to pause the movie. Then she asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. I stepped into this topic uncomfortably, but I just said yes and then listened to her. After 10 minutes of her story, she was so enraged that she screamed at the top of her lungs about how they broke up. I was afraid the neighbors would call the police. I asked her to lower her volume, but she didn't listen to me. She didn't stop screaming. What freaked me out was the fact that she was in such a fit and yelled that she slit his throat. It was a major game changer for me. I couldn't believe what this girl was capable of. She was a stranger to me. Everything I had seen was becoming alarming. After a few more minutes, she said thanks for listening and she began to giggle. After getting out of there pretty quickly, I went to my room to get some sleep. It made me feel uneasy to be in this house with her, and what makes it worse is there was no lock on my bedroom door. To act as a barricade, I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it. The sound of my dresser scraping against the floor woke me up in the middle of the night. Beth pushed over my door. When I turned on my light, I yelled at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She looked insane through her eyes. She was so drunk. After pushing the door shut, I yelled at her to go to her bed. As she walked back to her room, I was unable to sleep again. As I walked out into the hallway the next morning, my heart dropped. One of her steak knives was lying on the floor by the door. It gave me goosebumps all over. All I could think about was her saying she would slit this guy's throat. She told me she doesn't remember trying to open my door when I confronted her about it. She even said she doesn't remember telling me about her ex. I had enough at that point. Having a month-to-month lease, I moved out and found a new place. A month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. I turned on my phone as soon as I left the restaurant and was shocked to discover that she had sent me 40+ text messages over the past 2 hours, which varied from "Hi, how are you?" to "I hate you." That was insane. I didn't respond, and she never contacted me again. If my dresser hadn't been in front of my door, would she have quietly entered my room and slit my throat? This still freaks me out to this day. That's it for today's video. If you or someone you know has a horror story you would like to share, please email us at the address in the description below at unsolvedghost2022@gmail.com. We will feature your story in a future video. Take care, and we will see you in the next video.